Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Welcome back to Short and to the Point here on Awful Announcing in the Comeback. Jessica Kleinschmidt joining you today. A really fun episode because we get to cover a bunch of topics. And I had to do it in a short amount of time, which I really appreciate it. So we also did get short and to the point for the first time in my life. That's very rare for me to just get to the point because your girl loves to ramble. Speaking of, I'm just going to get to the point. Our guest today was Peter Rosenberg. Extensive background in every topic you can imagine, sports, hip hop, everything that comes to mind. And for him, the reason why I loved talking to him is because of the different things that we covered. He's the host of Real Late, the hip hop podcast, the first actual OG podcast of sorts. He's also featured on the Michael Kay show, which we all know who Michael Kay is, one of the goats of broadcasting and radio, sports radio. And Peter Rosenberg is also the host of Cheap Heat. Just started listening to that for you WWE folks out there. It's a super good podcast. I highly suggest it. It was really fun to prep for this. Talk about his background, growing up, and all the things. Take a listen. So I wanted to talk about your background because growing up, you were listening to pop music in your household, right? But then the next thing you know, you're one of the first hip hop podcasts and with the radio background. So how did that happen? Where did your love for hip hop start?
So yeah, I did grow up in a house in Chevy Chase, Maryland, in the DC suburbs with my parents listening to sort of typical, Jewish suburban parent music, Paul Simon, Billy Joel, things like that. And then trips to visit my grandparents in New York. My older brother, Nick, started, really like getting into listening to hip hop on the radio in New York. This is like late 80s. And so I was just sort of a sponge, listening to what he was listening to and didn't really imagine at that point that like music would ever be sort of part of my calling. When I was a little kid, I just thought I was always into sports and that's all I'd ever be into is sports. Mm-hmm. And then as time went on, like, you hit middle school, that age where you start to really get into music. And yeah, I just ended up diving in kind of harder than I ever expected and decided to end up, taking that route.
What aspect of the music got you? Was it the beat, the lyrics, or what part of that? Because I know when you're younger, you maybe don't understand the lyrics or you think you do. Because when I figure out the songs I was listening to in middle school, I'm like, how the hell did I do that? But what aspect of it kind of got you hooked?
It's a good question. I think there was like a basic sonics kind of part of it of like, I just enjoyed the way it sounded to my ear, vocally, I would imagine. But also, there's like a couple layers to it. There's like, just the fact this very exciting thing was happening. Like if you were able to be of a conscious age and young enough to like be interested, what an amazing thing to get to like observe the creation and formation of this like art form that now is like, it's just like continued to be this worldwide phenomenon for so long. Like, hip hop's ability to stay cool and sort of like in the forefront of trends, it's lasted like forever. But as a kid growing up in the 80s, like you were really seeing it happen. So like, there was just a lot of excitement around it. And then I think as I got a little bit older, really it was a cultural interest, a cultural curiosity, like, hearing what like people like Public Enemy were talking about or NWA were talking about and being like, wait, what are they talking about? Because I'm not hearing stuff like this, such blunt conversation about, race and politics and police brutality and racism. Yeah, I think all of those things then became intriguing to me as well. So it was sort of a perfect storm.
How do you think it was able to balance all of that? Because like there's obviously some controversial and real topics, but I think the one thing that hip hop's been able to do, I don't want to sound naive, but stay cool. And you mentioned that, but it's transitioned over the years. So how are they able to find the balance of maintaining that, but still like educating and learning stuff throughout the years?
I think it's just by having a really broad genre. The fact is, for a long time, there wasn't a lot of trendy stuff that was talking about things that were important. It's sort of new to be trendy and also kind of positive. Like that's existed always, but like in pockets. But like this sort of era where like, you know, we had your Kendrick Lamars and your J. Cole's, you know, artists who really overtly talked about things in a sort of important way and were really popular. I think it took a longer time to get there than people really give it credit for. People act as if like the positive music was in the forefront of pop music all the time in the 80s and 90s. And that wasn't really true. I mean, you'd have little moments of it, but mostly it was niche, you know? And I think that it's just a really, really broad genre with like, you know, these days you have really young, really sort of like fun oriented, light sort of music. You have obviously the more like street level, edgy young music, like, you know, like drill, which has been popular over the last few years. Now you have like the aging artists, you know, who are still making new music. LL Cool J dropped an album this week. You know, Tribe Called Quest will go into the Hall of Fame in October. You know, like so Fat Joe dropped a new single like yesterday. Like, so you have sort of this multifaceted genre now, which just like any other, you know, big genre, like rock and roll, like it took a long time for rock and roll. At first, rock and roll was one specific thing. And then sort of like British Invasion expands to one thing. And then, you know, you end up getting to like punk and grunge and all these other things that are sort of encapsulated under this one umbrella. But really, you know, hip hop is that now too. It's this really, really broad genre that has so many things. But it is interesting to me that like, no matter how many different things change within hip hop, when you look around, whether it be like at sports or award shows or like whatever the mainstream thing is, like even Taylor Swift wanted to make songs with Ice Spice and Kendrick Lamar. Like it is always sitting there as this thing that is sort of like the arbiter of cool. Like, I don't know. It's just sort of innate to what the genre is.
And how did they do that? Because like I know, like I love LL Cool J for being LL Cool J, but you want to obviously stay with the Joneses, if you will, and stay relevant. Do you get a sense that they're embracing that? Like they don't want to escape for who they are, but still they know like the younger generation, they want to listen to what they're listening to or play what they're listening to.
Well, I think the LL conversation is an interesting one because this album is unique. You know, he made an album that's entirely produced by Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest. He really decided to just make his own album with its own feel. There's no, with the exception of like some features of younger people, he did no chasing on it. And I think the proof is in the pudding of how much better that is. Like, I think that's been a lesson for people is like, well, what is keeping up with the Joneses? Do you really have to try to rap like kids? Because you don't want to do that.
Right.
Like, and do you want to like try to talk about what they're talking about? Like, why would you want to do that? Like, honestly, what can a 55-year-old artist, you know, relate to? I mean, a couple of things, but how much can you really relate to what a 20-year-old is saying? And
you don't want to be the old dude walking into the frat party like, hey, what's up, kids? Like, you don't want to be that guy.
What's up, home dudes? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, you don't being the narc. Like, don't be the narc, be the cool older guy. Just be that guy. And like, I think people are learning that is a thing. And I think Jay-Z deserves credit for that. You know, Eminem deserves credit for that. But like a lot of people do. Like the fact is, the genre was brand new. So the lazy take was always, it's a young man's game. And I was like, well, you're only saying that because the genre is young. Well, and because why? Because the clubs are filled with young people. At some point, the people who are in the clubs right now are going to be home with kids and no longer in the clubs. And those people still are an audience. So I just think the whole it's a young person's game was just this really basic take that for a long time really killed a lot of legends' trajectories. You know, like there's a certain generation that was just like, they were considered old. You go back and I'll be like, man, we considered so-and-so and so-and-so old and sort of uncool. And you look back now, they were 40. Like they were not old and they were like pushed aside. And I don't think that's going to happen anymore. I think that lesson has been learned. Like, no, why? Well, you have to graduate. No one said that to Bob Dylan or Paul Simon or Mick Jagger. So why would we say that's a hip hop artist?
Well, and it's interesting because you mentioned like the transitions and like I can think of like I know what 90s hip hop is and 90s rap is, but I don't remember like the actual on this date it transferred from this era to this era. Was there like a hard shift or did it kind of have to be a soft launch or was it embraced or was it one of those things where you kind of had to suck it up, or was there pushback? Do you remember anything of
You mean
that sort?
in terms of old artists being able to find like a place,
Yeah.
sort of? No, I think it's just evolution. I think it's just like it's just how things go over time, and I think that the Jay-Z 444 album was sort of a big step. This guy in his 40s making an album that's about things that go beyond what you've heard him rap about before. I think that album was impactful. But no, I think it's really just a normal, evolution of music.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I keep going back to him because he's one of my favorite artists, but like, you could argue that Paul Simon's greatest body of work is Graceland, and he did Graceland in his mid 40s. He wasn't a kid when he made that album. He'd had a whole career with Garfunkel, and then he started a solo career and did movies and did soundtracks and did this and did that, and then was like, I'm gonna go to South Africa and make this album, and then comes up with this thing that is this amazing body of work. Sort of the way I feel about Beyonce's Cowboy Carter, which I think could be like a real feather in the hat kind of album for her, as she's just turned 43 years old.
Yeah.
So I don't know why people decided that artists should be like, you should only hit your best when you were 22. Like, no, that's not how it works.
Yeah. I want to talk about, like, you're very authentic and outspoken too. And I saw this quote from Busta Rhymes describing you as the only DJ that's still trying to implement that filthy, under the nail, holy, sacred, and pure, unmixed, undiluted, untampered with real hip hop shit. So I'm interested, when you get these compliments from people like that, A, how does that make you feel? And B, why is it important for you to stay just true to yourself?
The things like that feel great. Like you need one great moment with a legend to balance out like 3,000 nasty comments that you get otherwise. So it really is lovely when those moments happen. And as far as why, listen, I'm never going to be everybody's cup of tea. Like I'm a specific sort of thing. And, but being the hip hop guy that was who I was. It's what I decided to do when I was a kid. I think I've evolved as a person in many ways, but like, I'm a big stay with the person who brought you to the dance kind of person. And like, I really think that, as much as I love sports, and I do truly love sports, like I will meet people who like, I'm like, oh my God, all right, you're a sicko. You love it more. Like, okay, you literally skipped your son's birthday to watch a team that you don't even root for. Like that's it's beyond the pale for me. Whereas in hip hop and the music that I fell in love with, like I just don't find anyone who's more passionate and loves it more. It really feels like so true to my core as a person. So to me, with all the things I do, it's so easy to do your job when you can just be yourself. Like I don't have to really prepare at my jobs when it's about topics that I'm in love with. You can just like go. I don't have to like sit there and take notes all the time. Like, for example, there are moments in sports, like if I know we're going to be doing a hardcore current baseball topic, I will literally like have to like look stuff up. And be like, all right, what did the Mets do last? Okay, who is second in the Mets rotation right now? And that's harder work. I'm not saying I can't do it. I think I can do it quite well, but it takes work. With wrestling and hip hop stuff, it's like if you just were like lights are on, go. That it's easy. Like it's all in there. It's a lifetime of research,
And does that help deal with the 3,000 shitty comments?
You mean the
love that you have for it?
Yeah. It helps, but I mean, when a lot of the comments are like questioning your love for the thing, if you're not balanced, it can get hard, and if you're spending too much time looking at what people who don't know you are saying and being defined by what strangers are saying, you can find yourself in a not so fun place. And not that you ever start believing it, but at least that you start like believing that they believe it. And like, how could all that You know, and you're like, I can
Yeah.
never explain to you how far off you are. Like, you saw me say one thing. Like one great example is like, I'll interview an artist who fans are really, obviously their fan base is super passionate about. And no one else in my space is taking time to go find this person and interview them. Given like, you know, sort of my platform and, you know, like I'll bring them to Hot 97. They've never done an interview in a huge commercial radio station. I invite them. They do the interview. They have a great time. They're super grateful. I'm super grateful. Awesome. The comments from their fans will be punishment that I didn't know everything that they, as their biggest fans, know. Not, oh shit, yo, that's so cool, bro. You brought them up to the radio. That's really neat that you took an interest because no one else in a mainstream space is taking that interest. That's so dope that you're doing that. It's, how did you not know this? How did you not know that? And you're like, I guess there is a part of you that can feel bad because you look back and you go, you know, there was a time when I was 20, I would have known everything that they're talking about.
Right.
But I'm 45 and I have 3 different things that I have my foot in. And the most that I can give reasonably is just by knowing who they are and helping try to put the word out about them.
Yeah.
I cannot also be their number 1 fan anymore. It's
That's
not
true.
who I am. But it can make you feel bad. Like you can, you're like, you know, you're like, oh, is 20-year-old me disappointed that I didn't know that, you know, who produced blank song? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Something that I'm working on in my career is like analyst versus host. And when you're hosting, you're interviewing a lot of people. There's an art to it as well, because when you, especially in radio, you're used to talking sometimes to nobody or obviously the fans and whoever's listening. How do you, like, I guess, master the aspect of interviewing somebody when on the other side, you're used to basically just talking the entire time? And it sounds like, from what I've heard, a lot of people like the way that you deliver and ask questions. So how do you balance those?
I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm sure some days my interviews suck and some days they're really good.
I'm still thinking about an interview I did a week ago and it's still like pissing me off. So I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, so, again, like if it's something you're super passionate about, I think it's so easy. Once you learn, I'll tell you this, it took me, and I still have work to do. Like I've done my 10,000 hours, but like I need to get to like 15, 20,000 hours. But, and I really like, I really do feel myself still evolving as a broadcaster. But I'll say one thing that I've gotten better at now in my 40s than I had in my 20s. And I mean, my 20s, forget it. But that even in my 30s was, and I know this sounds like almost so basic, but it was like really the art of listening, you know, and realizing that like there's more stuff to get in the interview when you're really listening to the answer. So like I might write down 10 questions. If the interview goes great, I shouldn't get to all 10.
Yes. I love that.
You know, and like you might be annoyed because one got left. You're like, ooh, that was a good one. But the reason is because they said something and you were listening. And then you were like, oh, let's go somewhere else now. Like I have a different approach to each kind of interview. You know, like if an artist is lesser known, unless they have like a totally fascinating story, I may not spend a ton of time on their entire biography.
You can over prepare for sure.
Well, yeah, it's better to prepare enough where you know what their biography is and you can ask about a couple of interesting things. Like, for example, if I have a legend that I'm interviewing and I've never interviewed them, I literally may, and I very do often start with like, let's talk about where you're from. Let's talk about how you first ever heard hip hop, right? And then let's hear about you as a child fan. And then let's hear about when you first started dabbling in it. Who were the people who gave you the blah, blah, blah? What was your first name as a rapper? Did you DJ first? I might do all of that because to me, if you're a legend, all of that stuff is like, oh, I want to hear all of this.
Yeah.
But like, if I'm introducing people to an artist, they may not need to hear every detail of their childhood. They might rather get to know like what makes them tick now. What are you interested in? Who are you as a person? What does your music sound like? Let's listen to something and break down what it sounds like. So I try to approach each thing differently. But what I've tried to get better at is just listening to what they say so I can go other places, which I know sounds so basic, but the truth is a lot of people, especially if you're young and nervous, you spend a lot of time thinking about what's your next question. And that's like a terrible way to talk to your like loved ones.
Yeah.
You know, like your partner's talking to you and you're like, What I wanted to say was terrible. And that's terrible for interviews too.
I agree. And it makes them understand that you're listening too. It just builds a rapport. I'm right there with you. I'm not just trying to tail end off what you just said, but you are obsessed with sports. So where was that born?
My sports love, it was really like a me thing. You know, my parents were not sports people at all. There were friends and family around who were. You know, I grew up in the DC area at the time that the Redskins were special and Joe Gibbs just had a special team. And so I fell in love, with that team and with football, which obviously turned out to be years of torment and torture, but such is the sports experience. You know, my parents did take me to a lot of baseball games, even though they weren't into sports. They did enjoy going to Orioles games. You know, growing up in DC at the time, pre-nationals, that's what you did. You drove to Baltimore and you went to Orioles games. And so I did a lot of that. Became a Celtics fan through some family friends, fell in love with Larry Bird, which is sort of like my real foray into loving basketball. And then, yeah, it just sort of grew from there. And like as a kid, I mean, I was really hardcore about basically everything. Pretty into hockey. These days, I'm certainly a casual hockey fan, and a more casual baseball fan, big basketball and football fan. But yeah, it just became part of me. And like Sundays obviously became really ritualistic for me, and it still is to this day. And you know, my wife, who I've now just been married to for a little over a year, has learned to adapt to my Sunday routine of very high pregame, intense mid-game, low post-game, as it tends to be. But yeah, so just became a big fan, studied it, listened to the radio, loved sports talk radio in the early days. A guy in DC named Ken Beatrice, who was a sports talk kind of legend back in the day. I listened to Bob Costas, who did a nationally syndicated show called Costas Coast to Coast. And then I just watched TV and emulated and loved broadcasting. I
love that. I listened to Cheap Heat recently, one of your recent episodes, and I Googled Banoffee pie.
That's research.
Yeah, no, I looked up Banoffee pie. Like I need a piece of that. Like I need to breathe.
I think it's Banoffee.
Banoffee pie.
But I said Banoffee too. But I think
either way, like holy, like
oh no, it's no. I got to find out if it's sold in this city. I don't know if New York has this, but it was special. Yeah. Like, and I'd never heard of it. And then I'm traveling in Europe and the boys
that's worth like getting on the elliptical for another few hours.
Yeah, totally. Maybe hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, the boys were like, you got to try this thing. And I'd never had it. And then I saw it sitting there. I was like, oh my God. And it's this caramel whipped cream chocolate gorgeousness. Yeah.
Too good. And you said something so brilliant about Rhea Ripley, and I really appreciated it. Beyond just the fact that she's connecting with fans so much in the audience, you said she's aware of how both men and women feel about her. Kind of, it's more fluid in that way. And this intense connection that she has with the fans, and it's not just national, it's universal, really. Can you just talk a little bit about her stardom? Because I know it stretches just beyond her presence.
Yeah, Rhea Ripley, you know, for people who have not been watching WWE, is just a massive young star. She's now just getting to like her mid to late 20s, maybe 26 now. She is like strong, like China, you know, and also like charismatic and like as beautiful a woman as you'll see on television, and is charming. Like she has a charming accent. She has like everything that could work for her athleticism, how strong she is. Like literally you will just like, there'll be a segment where you're just like staring at her arms and you're like, are you real? Like what is this? You know, she's got so many different things that make her great. Her move set, the moves she's actually capable of doing in the ring are so cool, right? She just has so many things. And yeah, she has this awareness that people are not only super into her in-ring performance, but that there is some sort of connection, attraction that fans have to her. Like, she knows it. And she never hams it up by, like, she doesn't generally post like particularly sexy Instagram pictures. She doesn't do anything that's obvious or corny. She just knows it. And like the way that she carries herself and little things that she'll do. She'll just do a little thing that she knows, as I think I said on the podcast, she knows it's just slightly titillating.
Yeah.
And she just knows how to do it in this way that's so authentic, man. It's been awesome to watch her, and I adore her. Like, she, as a human being, she's just as popular and beloved a person as there is there, you know. Bianca Belair as well. Like, I often talk about that, like that when those two showed up, all due respect to all the great superstars we have, but there is something special about like the heart of Rhea Ripley and Bianca Belair and the kindness that they've sort of brought with them. Like, everyone roots for them. Like, you just want them to be great. And fortunately for them and everybody else, they have been great.
Yeah. We had Raquel on the show. I'm obsessed with her too. She's the same way. What a beautiful
what a beautiful human being
I
she
can't.
is.
She makes me want to be a better person, and I'm not exaggerating. Like, not even exaggerating.
No, she is a lovely, lovely person.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned China. Do you think Rhea would have played well in different eras of WWE?
Oh, I mean, I have to imagine. I mean, obviously it was a different time then. It was harder for women. They weren't getting the opportunities. So it's a sort of different animal, if you will. But yeah, I mean, I think someone like her with the talent, the look, the charisma, yeah, I can't see an era existing where she wouldn't have made it happen. Maybe back in the day, she would have had too many tattoos.
Yeah.
And that would have been like, because I mean, you didn't even see men with tattoos at that time.
Yeah.
So the idea of people being like, a woman with tattoos on TV, what?
Yeah.
So besides that, yeah, I can't see anything that would have held her back. She's too great.
Yeah. Last two, and I'll let you go. Joe Tessitore, you guys talked about him on Cheap Heat as well. You mentioned, let it play out. Not necessarily bad for what you guys saw of him. And I like that you guys pulled back the curtain of what it takes to do his job. I think that's very important. What did you think of how he did in his debut?
Oh, I thought Tess has been great. I mean, it's the best debut we've had in a long time. And respectfully to the amazing Kevin Egan, who is such an incredible sportscaster and doing such a great job broadcasting for Apple and MLS. And he did a great job. And others who, Jimmy Smith did a good job. Other people have been there and done well. Tess, he's built for this. His style, he has a pro wrestling style. Like, it's built into him. Like, honestly, it was built into him. It's built into him when he does boxing, when he did football. You can hear it right now when he does college football. Like, he has a big voice. Like, it's like everything's big. So, and then he knows the product. He loves it. He knows how to run traffic, which is a really hard thing, as we explained. It's a lot to deal with when you're doing live TV like that. He has it all. So I'm as confident in the success of Joe Tessitore as I've been about anyone who's come along. He's going to be really good. Yeah,
you said it was sportsy, which is interesting because when you think of WWE, it's not a bad thing necessarily, but you could also differentiate that from other sports as well. It doesn't necessarily mean it's on the same level playing field, right?
Yeah, and if you're too sportsy, it doesn't work because it's not sports. It is entertainment. So you want to be sportsy, but if you have to always recognize that you're also entertaining. So it's a perfect balance that's super hard. And yeah, he's the man.
Yeah. Speaking of the man, Michael K. I want to know what your relationship is like with him.
You were going to say Becky Lynch, but go ahead.
Same thing. Yeah. Oh gosh. You want to talk about girl crush. But for Michael K., what's your relationship like with him? What does one learn from a guy like Michael K.?
Kay and I have a great relationship. I consider him a close friend. As far as working with him, what I've learned from Michael, and I still can't do it as well as he can. What Michael is an underrated master of is that when he's at his best, he is able to run point on a talk show and do serious stuff and also be funny and be like, and be the butt of the joke and be silly. I'm not saying he does it every day, because there are days when he gets just baseball crazy, and I feel like I kind of have to tap him sometimes to be like, let's come back to the silly a little bit, pal. It's okay. There's 162 of these things. But in general, to me, I've never met a better host who can lead and also be funny and silly, because leading does not lend itself. Like whenever I lead, so when Michael's out, I lead. And the reason we do that is because we wanted to keep Don. I thought it was Don's too critical to the show to lead, because when he leads, he immediately stops being Don.
Yeah.
And I suffer from that too. I just feel like Don's more important. So I was like, if I lead, I can pull a little bit away from my silly and my funny, because I tend to be overly that on that show.
That's fair.
And I can leave Don in his spot to be Don still. Michael, to his credit, he's always the same. Like he can lead and he still finds this way to, even with all the traffic you have to do, and he can still be silly. And to me, that's just such a rare gift. Like you look around at the main tandems of people who do these things, you will mostly find that when people are leading and they're serious, they fall out of that. And I think he's brilliant at that.
Yeah, it's hard, especially when you're on the East Coast bias and you're a bullseye on you. Everybody's looking at you. All right. This was amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the questions. They were thoughtful and interesting, and I appreciate it.
Of course. That was Peter Rosenberg. Told you we tackled a lot of topics. All the topics you can imagine within like a 25, 30-minute window. It's very, very tough task on my part. I appreciate you guys tuning in to Shorten to the Point, and Peter Rosenberg for stopping by. Make sure you follow this podcast wherever you can get podcasts on all the platforms, and follow us on YouTube and just search Awful Announcing. You'll see my face, unfortunately. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at Kleinschmidt JD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.